Many members have raised questions about various facets of MDA's new licensing framework for online news sites. I will answer them in terms of its rationale, what MDA actually introduced, its expected impact, and the notice period given for the change. Madam, a healthy public discourse, in Mr. Chen Sharma's words, must be grounded in accurate facts. This is true whether the discourse takes place online or in the physical world. Entities that publish the news have a duty to ensure that news is accurately and fairly reported because they provide the basic elements of information upon which individuals make decisions or form judgments and opinions on any matter. Hence, traditional news providers, both in broadcast and print, have always operated under individual licensing. As the media landscape converges, news is published not only in print and broadcast, but also on the internet. As online sites have become a more significant source of news, our regulatory framework has to evolve to keep pace with the changing landscape. The new licensing framework seeks to place online news sites and traditional news sites on a more consistent regulatory basis while recognizing that they are not identical. Mr. Pritam Singh asked whether MDA considered the efficacy of introducing rules that apply to traditional media into the online space. I would like to stress that we have never taken the approach that the internet space is to be unregulated. If online conduct leads to offences under the penal code or other laws of the land, the persons responsible are held accountable. As far as other content is concerned, we have regulated with a light touch through the class license scheme introduced in 1996. And this has not changed, madam. The new licensing framework affects only 10 sites, and they are subject to a few more specific obligations under the license commensurate with their role as news providers. In the new licensing framework, online news sites will be individually licensed if they, 1, report an average of at least 1 article per week on Singapore's news and current affairs over a continuous period of 2 months and are visited by a monthly average of at least 50,000 unique IP addresses from Singapore over the same 2 months. Requiring these sites to take up individual license also places a stronger onus on the licensee operating these websites to be aware of their legal obligations and to report incidents and occurrences responsibly. The online news site license will require a licensee to adhere to a set of content standards which are no different from existing standards under the Internet Code of Practice and class license. These content standards are meant to safeguard racial and religious harmony, public order, as well as good taste and decency. I wish to stress that nothing in the content standard prevents licensee from commenting on government policies. Since the content standards have not changed, licensees will enjoy the same freedom of expression they have hitherto enjoyed under the class license scheme. Fears that the new licensing framework will stifle internet freedom are unfounded. The vibrant online environment that critics purport to cherish emerge under the same set of content standards in the class license scheme. There are only 2 additional requirements which will be imposed on licensees. Firstly, when directed by MDA, they have 24 hours to take down content which is in breach of the content standards. And this is important, as news on these high-reach sites can go viral very quickly and have a detrimental impact on society if they undermine racial harmony or raise public order concerns. Secondly, licensees have to provide a $50,000 performance bond. A similar requirement is imposed on other individual licensees, such as niche TV licenses. This is to ensure that licensees exercise their best efforts to keep their websites free of prohibited content, and where there is such content, to remove it expeditiously within the time frame of 24 hours when directed by MDA. The performance bond need not be provided in cash to MDA, but can be in the form of banker's guarantee or insurance. None of the licensees of the 10 sites have raised any concerns with posting the performance bond. Madam, we do not expect the new licensing framework to affect in any way the operations of the 10 online sites identified for individual licensing. Several members have asked about the scope of the licensing framework and the types of sites that will be covered. In general, bloggers, internet commentators, and niche sites provide their personal perspective of issues and do not regularly report on the news and current affairs of the day. As a result, they have not been determined to be reporting on Singapore news and current affairs, and so these websites do not fall within the scope of the licensing framework. However, should these websites morph into online sites, reporting on Singapore news, MDA will have to separately assess if they meet the two criteria for licensing. For now, MDA is working with the organizations that own the 10 sites, and MDA is not considering individual licensing any other sites at this point in time. Some sites claim that if subject to individual licensing, they will not be able to furnish the $50,000 performance bond or even a guarantee. I would like to make 3 points here, Madam. Firstly, the $50,000 performance bond was set in view of the financial means of the 10 identified online sites. Secondly, the MDA has already stated that if the performance bond is beyond the financial means of a future licensee, it is willing to consider specific circumstances of that licensee and adjust the performance bond accordingly. The key is that the performance bond must provide a meaningful incentive to the licensee to make the best effort to comply with the licensing conditions. Thirdly, and in response to Mr. Zaki's question, it would not be a sound regulatory approach to exempt entities on the basis that they intend to operate non-commercially. Our rationale for this new licensing framework is based on the special responsibility that news providers hold. This responsibility is not diminished simply because the operators choose to operate on a non-profit or non-commercial basis, if they indeed set themselves out as providers of news content. Another concern expressed by sites not identified for individual licensing is that it has a chilling effect on their activities. I think, Madam, this is far-fetched. In any case, I don't think they are so easily chilled. I have already explained that the MDA will set a reasonable performance bond commensurate with the financial position of a future licensee. The intention is not to prevent the site from operating under a license. On the contrary, the intent is to allow a qualifying site to continue to operate under an individual license. Members have asked about the manner in which the licensing framework was implemented and whether the potential licensees were engaged. The licensing framework is a refinement of the existing class license scheme, which internet content providers are already familiar with, and it is not a major shift. The 10 potential licensees were informed of the new licensing framework before it was introduced, and MDA's engagement with them on the exact terms of the license is ongoing. The entire process of engagement, which started in May, is expected to take 4 to 5 months, after which the license will actually take effect. This, Madam, should provide sufficient time for the industry to give its feedback on the detailed license condition. Madam, the government is committed to wider consultation on issues that affect the public. Over the past few months, Singaporeans have given their views on various government policies as part of our Singapore conversation. However, in this instance, the licensing framework only applies to a small number of news sites and does not affect the overwhelming majority of internet content providers. Besides, content standards have remained unchanged, and the license will not impact the public in general. So therefore, when implementing the framework, we did not feel there was a need for wider public consultation before the licensing framework was announced. Nevertheless, Madam, we will continue to engage stakeholder groups on this issue to allay any concerns that they may have. As to whether the framework could be extended to overseas-based websites, the issue will be studied further in tandem with planned amendments to the Broadcasting Act. The broad intent is to ensure that overseas broadcasters that are specifically targeting Singapore will be covered under our regulatory frameworks. This has become imperative, with technological advances increasingly blurring the line between local and foreign broadcasters. However, we recognize that this is a complex issue and will therefore consult widely before tabling the amendments to the Broadcasting Act in Parliament sometime next year. Madam, let me now deal with some of the remaining issues by members. Mr. Gerald Giam asked about past issuance of takedown notices by MDA. Since 1996, MDA has issued 24 takedown notices. One instance was for a religiously offensive video. 21 were for pornographic content or advertising soliciting sex or sex chats, and 2 were for inappropriate gambling-related content. MDA has not encountered any instance where the site owner has refused to comply with the takedown notice. The track record has shown that notwithstanding that the same content standards have been in existence since 1996, MDA has not directed websites to take down content just because it is critical of the government. There is therefore no cause for concern that the new online news licensing framework would reduce the vibrancy of online discourse or negatively impact the promotion of more active and engaged citizenry. Mr. Zaki Mohamad suggested setting up an independent body to review sites to be included in the licensing framework, content to be taken down, as well as hear appeals from licensees. MDA has convened panels drawn from members of the community to help it provide input on community standards. However, Madam, it would be wrong in principle for MDA to abrogate its regulatory responsibility and to pass decisions such as whether an entity should be licensed to another body. There are already established processes for parties aggrieved by a regulatory decision under the Broadcasting Act to seek redress. Mr. Zaki Muhammad also asked whether media accreditation is a potential end result of the licensing framework. Accreditation is accorded to news organizations that cover government events and functions regularly to facilitate their work. Accreditation is not compulsory for news-related organizations to engage in news gathering, and many organizations do operate without seeing the need to apply for accreditation. The criteria considered before accreditation is conferred include the reach or distribution of the media organization and its professional standing. Accrediting media organizations and licensing news sites are assessed and determined on very separate considerations. Madam, in conclusion, I want to reiterate that the new licensing framework is designed to enable identified sites to move seamlessly from the existing class license to hold an individual license. The rationale for the change is based on the special responsibility that news providers have, because the news they produce is used by the public, you and me, our children, to come to informed decisions and opinions on matters of public interest. The licensing framework places traditional news providers and online news providers on a more consistent regulatory framework. We do not expect the new framework to have any effect on the degree of expression that currently exists in the online space. Since the introduction of the class license framework in 1996, the MDA has shown itself to be balanced and restrained in the exercise of its powers to regulate online content. It has never used them to order the removal of content that is critical of government policy or government ministers. Concerns that the internet will be stifled are thus far-fetched and will prove to be unfounded in due course.